Okay, let's turn our attention now to Anglican moral theology. Um, and I'm going to do this in two parts. The first part will be just a brief kind of overview of how Anglicans have started to think about questions of ethics and sources and all that sort of thing. And then I will turn to kind of the way that it seems to work out these days. And first thing that I want to point out, and should be of no great surprise to anybody, is that unlike some of our Christian colleagues, there is no real single place or single individual to which we can look to find answers to thorny ethical issues. There's no single body of teaching. We don't have Luther or Calvin or somebody like that to lay it all out. There have been various people, and certainly significant people over the course of time, who've helped us think through these things, but no one person. And because there's been no one person, and there have been a variety of voices, again, shouldn't come as any great surprise, there's no consensus on how to think about this, really, and certainly no consensus on results. And we see that in the church today as various folks struggle over all of the issues, the ethical issues that we face. So just to start, and it kind of back in the 16th century, so Anglicanism got its start, and heirs of Roman Catholic moral thinking. But of course, a lot of that was based in the magisterium, based in the teaching office in Rome, and we weren't going to follow that very far. So certainly early on in the 16th, early 17th century, moral teaching was the commandments, the 10 commandments. They summarized what we were to do, but they also, in here we see some hints of Roman Catholic thinking. They also summarized natural law, and that becomes one of the strong pieces of thinking for Anglicans. So yes, the 10 Commandments were there, but they weren't. We didn't see them as causing. If you do this, you'll be in right relationship with God. It's always been the other way around, and we see this in a lot of different contexts, not just ethics, but that because of our relationship with God, then the consequence of that relationship is our acting rightly. Because we are baptized, because we are adopted children of God, then we behave in certain ways. So that relationship is sustained through prayer and through worship, and through those activities, right action becomes normalized for the Christian. So that becomes kind of the backdrop. Now, going back to natural law, Hooker, Richard Hooker, he relates natural law to God's eternal law. So it's not just the law of nature; it is God's eternal law. And so those laws are grounded in the law of God's own being, and humans therefore participate in that. And a quotation here from Hooker: "For that which all men have at all times learned, nature herself must needs have taught. And God, being the author of nature, her voice is but his instrument. By her, from him, we receive whatsoever in such sort we learn." So we all learn through nature, because nature is one of the ways that God's will is revealed. And so the natural law becomes something that is available to everyone, and we see that in Romans. Paul hints at those kinds of things in Romans, and Hooker talks about that as well. The Gentiles can perceive this because it's available to everybody through nature. So then it becomes amplified by the Old and New Testaments for Hooker. That basic line of thinking is adopted by the Anglican thinkers for the next several centuries. And it plays out in different ways, in different contexts. In some places it gets really strongly focused towards issues of social justice, that there's personal conversion, and personal conversion moves the individual fulfilling their calling in their daily life and work. And so therefore, fulfilling your calling in work means that you need to have the means, the environment to do that work. William Wilberforce talked about that. Another great thinker, Frederick Denison Maurice, in the late 19th century, and some of his folks, Christianity, that God's will for us is that we form a society where people can work together. You hear this hint from Wilberforce that we are a society in which we engage with one another and on behalf of one another to achieve the common good. And to do that, we need to have the environment in which to do it, the circumstances in which to do it. And that means that exploitation of workers does not foster that kind of environment. So early on, in the late 19th, early 20th century, we have this strong social justice movement that's an ethical social justice that grows out of sort of a natural law, but also a scriptural basis. And then William Temple, an Archbishop of Canterbury in the early part of the 20th century, a theologian and an ethical thinker. His theology really brought home the whole issue of the incarnation. The material world was infused with worth for him. And so this separation between spirit and matter went away. Again, this incarnational focus that meant that we can't sort of just deal with the body over here and think that spirit's going to float off into heaven and be happy. The body has to work too. Again, strong social justice orientation. Temple really didn't like the private ownership of industrial resources and all of that kind of stuff. So in that early part of the 20th century, Kenneth Kirk arrives, and he writes several books. Again, the big one, which I've already made reference, Vision of God. And his, where I want to stop this piece before I move into the next one of the things that was so strongly put in that book and becomes kind of a focal point for Anglican thinking recently is that he says the highest prerogative of the Christian is the activity of worship. And nowhere except in this activity will the Christian find the key to his ethical problems. It's in worship. When we are in right relationship with God, when we are encountering God and allowing God to encounter us in worship, then we move forward. And what is worship, if not right behavior before God, carrying out God's will, God's wishes for the creation, again going back to the restoration of humanity and to God and the renewal of right relationships. What better place of doing that is in the world in which we live.